In this video, I'm going to share with you why investors don't like to give you feedback. And this is whether or not an investor says no or ghosts you, or even if you've applied to Y Combinator. I see this complaint a lot where founders say, I'd really like to know why Y Combinator didn't say yes and invite me down to an interview. And Y Combinator is very diplomatic about it with their response saying, we get it wrong all the time. We're not going to give you feedback. And I want to talk about this piece of advice from Michael Seibel that I heard and I've taken to heart. And I really think is a great piece of advice when it comes to understanding investor feedback. And when they say no, you want to believe the no, but don't believe the why. So they'll tell you no. And if they do tell you why, because it's great to ask why they're not going to invest, but don't necessarily believe it. And I'm going to share with you in this video about how investors kind of get emotionally derailed, or they're not sure if they want to share with you the why, or they kind of say things just to say things, kind of get you off their back. We're going to investigate the psychology of the investor, and I'm going to share with you from my experience as well. And let's come to some conclusions. I'm going to help you understand why investors don't give you feedback, and when they do tell you why, maybe you shouldn't believe them. Before we continue, my name is Ed King. I'm a 7-time funded founder with 2 exits. That's just a fancy way of saying I failed a bunch of times. And I like to share that because I want you to learn from my failures as much as my successes. And I use YouTube videos like this to help founders avoid some of the catastrophic mistakes that I've made, especially when trying to raise early stage funding. We're talking like pre-seed or seed. Not to say you're not going to make mistakes, but I'm going to try to make your life a little bit easier because it's hard enough as it is. I'm also the chief strategy officer at startups.com. I have raised over $100 million for my startup funds, my startups, as well as other people's startups. And I work with a team at startups.com that has worked with startups that have gone on to raise close to $1 billion. I myself have experienced so many no's from investors. We're talking literally dozens, close to hundreds of no's, and they all hit me a little bit different. But later on, as I've developed and matured as a founder, I've learned soft heart and thick skin, and I've learned the lessons as to why investors say no. And when they tell you why, don't necessarily want to believe it. I believe it, but take it with a massive grain of salt until I don't have to believe it, or I don't believe it until there's evidence to make me believe it. Let me walk you through what that looks like. In the meantime, if you're here from startups.com, thank you so much. If you don't know startups.com, come check us out. A lot of free resources there. Do the YouTube thing, like, comment, subscribe. Here we go. Let me tell you about investors. To understand what's going on, I want to introduce you to something in psychology called field theory. And this explains how people act in any social situation. And it's like a triangle. In any situation, there are 3 factors at play. There's you, the individual experiencing it. There's them, the person that you're interacting with. And there's the context or the environment in which you are both interacting. Let's break this down. Field theory. There's you, the founder. And then there's the investor, that's them. And then there's the environment or the context in which you're operating. You're looking for investment, they have money, but the context is their investment thesis. The context is the environment in which your startup is operating. Are you in AI that's super hot and trendy right now? Or are you in something that's not currently in vogue, that's not in cycle? Are you at the beginning of it? There's context when it comes to your personal experience. Are you a VC-backed founder with a previous exit? I saw a founder raise money with no MVP and no revenue whatsoever, no customers, and they raised something like $1.5 million because him and his co-founder, they came from a company that had a exit and they were a unicorn company. So that adds to the context, that adds to the environment. What's going on? Do you have other offers on the table? Or have you been working at this for a very long time? Do you have domain expertise? Do you fall in their investment thesis? Maybe the investor doesn't have dry powder. There are so many factors that go into the decision and how people operate. And you as a founder, you have to pay attention to these factors and be super smart about it and not get bent out of shape, get emotional, and figure out how you're going to interpret the signals and the patterns and adjust accordingly so you have a successful fundraise. Now, let me give you a little peek as to why investors don't want to give you feedback. Most smart investors, experienced investors, me included, don't want to give feedback. We don't want to open the door for you to argue because, as I've said in other videos, it's usually an emotional response. There's something that makes us not want to invest, and it's hard to explain. Just things are not lining up. And if we try and explain it to you, then you're going to interpret a specific way, and you're going to open the door to either argue or you're going to be offended, and the investor doesn't want to do that. If I'm an investor and I'm looking at your startup and you could be the best founder in the world, building a baby unicorn, sitting in a rocket ship, ready to go parabolic and to the moon, and I can't see it right now, what if I'm wrong in the future? What if it's a matter of 6 months that you go out and hit these inflection points and suddenly you are experiencing hyper growth, you're experiencing traction, and I have turned you off and I've said no and given you all the reasons and shut you down that you don't come in contact with me. That's the reason a lot of investors, even though they invest in seed, they say they invest in pre-seed, they say they will invest pre-product, pre-revenue, but they're really not. What they want to do is they want to meet you and they don't tell you no. They tell you something like, oh, come back to us when you have $100,000 ARR or you've got 10,000 users. There are so many things that investors say to keep you at the table because they don't want to destroy that relationship. An investor's process is their product. And if they give you a bad process and turn you off, like I know some investors that are just absolute schmucks. They're big fat jerks, a-holes to founders, and I'll never refer to them. Or I tell the founder, never talk to them. The founder is completely turned off and you might have passed somebody up. You might be the next Mark Zuckerberg. You might be the next Elon Musk. I don't know, the Brian Chesky's of the world. Sam Altman. That might be you sitting out there. So I don't want to tell you no and then give you a whole bunch of reasons why and then turn you off. And I don't want to be a jerk about it. So I'm going to keep that relationship open. And that's what you need to understand. Now, there are investors out there that tell you no and they tell you why. And like I said, they're big fat jerks about it. And typically they're not smart startup investors. I know startup investors who say they invest in startups. They say they're investors, but they're so mean and they give this wonky feedback that makes no sense for the startup investor. I heard of an investor from founder that I was working with. They were from Goldman Sachs. They were investment banker. And what they did is they gave feedback and they said, it's a no because you don't do this, 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 and this, which made no sense for the founder whatsoever. And this investor made these founders jump through all these hoops, knowing it was going to be a no all along, making the founders grovel and putting them in this power dynamic that even if they were going to invest, I'd say, you know what? You don't want them as an investor. If they're good enough, they will help you and they will be the type of investor that you want to call because they are operating in good faith. They give you a response right away. They are partners with you. They bring smart money. And if you're the type of founder and you're building a great company, you have the luxury of picking the investors. And the good investors know that, and therefore they don't give that erroneous type misleading feedback. I see this happen all the time with, let's say, a real estate investor or a small business investor who maybe sold out of a mainstream company. Maybe they were in a company like oil and gas industry. This happens a lot in my neck of the woods. And suddenly they think that they're the hometown hero locally, but they think suddenly they're the smartest startup investors in the world and they have no clue and they give really bad advice and they give you the worst reasons why they didn't invest that distract you or make you feel insecure, that make you pivot prematurely and start acting on advice that is not congruent with what makes you a successful startup founder. That's not relevant, completely meaningless, and that's what I want to help you avoid. Now, let's say an investor does give you why, and they tell you, oh, we don't invest in this space, or we don't invest until you've got a certain amount of revenue. Let's say they do give you some feedback. What you want to do is take that with a grain of salt, but you want to file that away and you want to study. You want to know what the patterns are, and if there's a trend, that's what you want to pay attention to. For example, I was working with a founder and we got this founder a whole bunch of VC meetings, and the feedback was all the same. We like the idea, but you're not ready yet for VC. You should go talk to angels. And it was from multiple sources. And the founder said, you know what, this is a common trend. And we talked about it. And I said, yeah, let's go start contacting angels. They didn't have as much traction as I thought they did. And it was a little misleading, but at least we got them VC meetings. And at least it was a really great education of what VCs are expecting. So the founder could manage their expectations and make sure they're targeting and conducting themselves appropriately to maximize their fundraising chances. Don't be afraid to ask why or say, can I get some feedback on why you would pass? And then file that away. But don't act upon it, because if you're the type who changes and pivots every single time one investor gives you feedback, gives you no, knowing that it will literally take dozens of investors, maybe 150, 200 investors to kick the tires before you get a yes and you close that check. If you keep pivoting and you keep bouncing around because of investors' opinion, if one investor can talk you into something, another investor can talk you out of it, and then you reveal yourself as a founder who does not have conviction, does not have the leadership to say, you know what, the investor passed, that's the investor, not for me. Or guess what? 15 out of the 20 investors told us no for the same reason. Now we should pivot. That's the type of founder that you need to be. Back to field theory. You need to think about, how am I responding to investor feedback? How am I regulating my emotions? How am I handling myself? What situation am I in? What situation have I put myself in? If you put yourself in a situation where you have absolutely no runway and you're desperate for funding, that's going to come out and affect the social dynamic and the responses from the investor. You've now changed the context, the environment in which you're operating in, and you have made it harder on yourself. That's not the investor's fault. Then you need to think about the investor and study the investor. How are they going to respond? If they are a seed investor and need you to show up with revenue, with a product, with signs of product market fit, don't contact them with your pre-seed deck, with your pre-seed startup, pre-product, pre-revenue. You're just wasting their time and yours, and you're going to be spending emotional resources, capacity, resources in general, and it's not going to help you. It's going to deplete you in the long run, because this is a marathon, not a race. The other thing you need to think about is, what are the macro conditions? Now we're to the context and the environment. You have thought about yourself. You're thinking about them as the investor. What type of investor are they? What will they respond to? And look at the macro conditions. We're coming off of one of the worst years that I've ever seen. I talk to founders who are good at raising money, and they say it is the hardest it's ever been. 2023, there's literally 72% or 66% less capital in the market, and founders are all upset and angry at investors. But if these investors, general partners, they don't have the funds from the limited partners because the LPs aren't reloading the funds, well, then that changes the context of the environment. And you as the founder, you need to think about that when you hear the why they might not invest, or you hear signs, you're gathering those signals that leads you to some conclusions, some assumptions as to why they're not investing. Keep this in mind. Believe the no. Everything should always be a no until the check's in the bank. If they say maybe, it's still a no. But don't necessarily believe the why. Don't believe the why, but catalog it and organize it in a way that you can study it to make your changes appropriately. And remember, investors come in all different shapes and sizes. Just like founders, you come in all different shapes and sizes. You're all working on different things, super creative. You're trying to change the world in your own unique way. Investors are managing their money in their own unique way. They have their own investment thesis. Even all the investors under one fund in one company, all the LPs, all the partners, associates, analysts, they all have different investment theses themselves, and they're just trying to follow the rules and make sure it all comes together so they make the right choice. So don't be deterred if you get that no. Ask why, but take that why with a grain of salt. Understand how field theory works. Hope this has been helpful. And I'm going to put some other videos on the screen to help you that I think will guide you in this whole fundraising, this thankless, insufferable experience that's fundraising. Buckle in. I know it's tough. I totally empathize with you, but I'm here to help. Let's work together. Let me know what you think. Let me know what other types of content that you want. Thanks for hanging out on this one. I'll see you in the next video.